Hello everybody, welcome to our virtual Pall Mall, a 67 Pall Mall. I've only done that 1,000 times. I hope everyone's well, and tonight we're very pleased to welcome back our old friend Jasper Morris, MW, author of Inside Burgundy, who after a very successful webinar, very popular webinar he did about Clos Saint-Jacques, he's going to be talking tonight about their neighbour of Clos Saint-Jacques vineyard in Gevrey-Chambertin, the Cazetiers vineyard. So kind of up there with the Grand Crus, and is it of Grand Cru status? I'm sure Jasper's going to tell us. So please do chat away at the side, share with us what you're drinking. Please do talk to Jasper as he goes through the webinar and put any photos you have on social media with hashtag 67FromHome. And please put any questions that you have in the Q&A box. And so that everyone can hear what you're saying, make sure that your settings are set to panelist and attendee. And a big welcome, Jasper. How are you, Jasper?
I'm very well indeed, I thank you, Ronan. I've had an excellent time. I seem to have got a little bit of... can you hear me clearly, or are you getting some feedback?
Oh, good, great.
Okay.
Very well. Bertrand is telling us hello from a drizzly Burgundy, so the weather's not good there.
In fact, that's not Bertrand, that was me.
But, that was you. Okay. Okay.
I know what, I've linked up using his information.
Okay.
And that might be why I'm getting a bit of feedback, so I may have to abandon that.
The sound sounds good. Sounds fine.
Good. Okay, it does for you, but it was wiggling in my ear.
Okay.
Right, everybody, let's kick off. Let's talk about Gevrey-Chambertin Cazetiers. So, as you know, across the various Zooms that we've been doing, we do some which are on a theme, some are on a vintage, some are on a village, and some are on a single vineyard, which is always fun because it really enables us to get deep down and dirty, looking at the vines of one particular place, but through the lens of 6 different producers. And that's what we've got to play with tonight. So Bertrand and I have actually been out in the vineyard all afternoon. We thought it was going to be much kinder weather than last week when we had icicles dripping off our noses. And so it started out, but with a very cold wind. Anyway, that will be appearing at a future moment as part of the 67 Pall Mall TV program. Sadly, this week, like some weeks, my samples didn't arrive in time. Post-Brexit, this is now more of a risk than before. However, earlier today, I called in on 2 of tonight's producers, and they kindly gave me full bottles. So out of every problem, a few nice things appear. So I won't be able to taste all the wines with you. They are all producers who I know well, so I will have a pretty good idea of how the wines should be tasting. And because it's all one vineyard, we should have the continuity of the same general feel. We've got Cecilia on communications tonight, so I'll ask her to put up the map, which shows us where Cazetiers is. It's sort of Cazetiers, it's sort of a little bit hidden between 2 different, whether you've got 2 syllables or 3. Actually, I've asked for control, but I don't really need it for this particular map. So you will see here the Gevrey-Chambertin in general, and we've got the usual color scheme. I'm actually currently working on 2nd edition of the book, and we're going to play around with the color schemes a little bit more. But you will see over more or less on the left that big block of all the Grand Crus, 9 of them in total, and nothing that wasn't contiguous with Chambertin and Chambertin-Clos de Bez was allowed to be a Grand Cru. So we've had the argument in the past, should Clos Saint-Jacques have been a Grand Cru? And Clos Saint-Jacques, we will find then, I will mark up Clos Saint-Jacques first. Just going to give it a single star for a single heart for now. And then next to it, right next to it, with a new heart, is, my hearts keep disappearing, this is very worrying, is Les Cazetiers. I'll just try that again. There we have a heart for Cazetiers. Yes, to lean forward to look at the screen. Now, so it's next door to Clos Saint-Jacques. It's a bigger vineyard. It's 9 hectares, just over 9 hectares. But it is quite different in style. So if we could just have a look at the next clip, which is a little map from Gevrey-Chambertin, which shows the whole vineyard and with it, it shows all the different holdings that people have. We don't necessarily know who they all are. Here it comes. So I have put on here, I've marked around the edge of what is Cazetiers. And if you look down to the bottom left, you can see the next door vineyard, i.e. Clos Saint-Jacques, and you can see that each of the strips there goes from bottom of the vineyard up to the top. And Cazetiers, it's not the same at all. You've got a row of small, incidentally, bottom of the vineyard is on the right-hand side and top is on the left. So this map has due north as the axis at the top, but the vineyard is running, the slope is running from the slightly upper left down to the slightly lower right. Basically, it's east facing, whereas Clos Saint-Jacques was southeast. And as you can see, there's a band of vineyards at the bottom. There's then a series that run from just above the bottom to 2/3 of the way up. And then there are some further blocks which are at the top where it's steepest. So as so often in Burgundy, steepest at the top, perfect angle in the middle, and flattens out a bit at the bottom. There's still some slope. Clos Saint-Jacques is broadly speaking spread over 3 different soil types, but it gets more complicated here in Cazetiers, and you've got 4 soil types in all. So because of the morcellated way of the different holdings, almost nobody has all 4 of the soil types. The one exception to that is Charles Magnat of domain Henri Magnat, because he has the good fortune to have various different blocks and he's got them in every part. So his combined Cazetiers is perhaps arguably the most complete of the wines. Depends what he does with it, of course, and we will see that very shortly. Right, now, the soil types, they don't exactly conform to how the vineyards are shaped there. But broadly speaking, at the bottom, where those blocks are, but perhaps continuing a little bit above that, you have a sandy marl soil, so it doesn't get too heavily clay. But you've got a bit of sandy marl on top of a bit of clay, on top of some crinoidal limestone, what the French call calcaire en troc, if you want to follow that in other books. But in English we say crinoidal, which basically means it's limestone inside which there are lots of fossilized lilies, though these lilies apparently were more of the animal kingdom than the vegetable kingdom. Then as you start to go up, so let's say the bottom segment of the middle sets of vine holdings, at that point, you are on a much, much harder limestone, what they call the calcaire de Prémaux, from Prémaux, just south of Nuit Saint-Georges. So that is very firm, hard rock, but it's still got a fair covering of topsoil at this point. There's a layer of clay on top of that calcaire de Prémaux. Then above that, our friend the crinoidal limestone comes back, and this may be the most classic band, if you like. And as we walked up the vineyard today, we could see the soil getting lighter, and we could see many more chippings of limestone in the topsoil. Finally, once you get to the top, you are back to marl, but it's a different marl. It's a white marl. You have something what they call the Ostrea acuminata type of limestone, which means that there are some small oyster shells mixed in, but it is a softer sort of limestone. It's a much cooler site anyway, because you've got the forest and you've got the winds further up. It's steeper, and it's a cool white soil as well. So those are the different types that we've got to play with. We're going to mix, of course, as always, the 6 growers, and we're also going to mix vintages a little bit. So we're going to start with Fèvelis holding, huge holding. They've got over 4 hectares out of the 9 now. That's quite recent. When they took over domain Dupont-Tisserandot, they got significant more than 2 hectares of Cazetiers to add to their own 2. So that really gives them a lot. I'm not sure if nowadays they actually put all of it into their bottling, or whether they sell some off or declassify some. And I think they're also doing a bit of replanting. When we were walking through today, there was one big broad sector, roughly in the middle. Let's see if I can tease it out on this map. May not be accurate, but I'm going to say we got the next map there. It's the block that says Les Cazetiers there, right in the middle. This block here, I think I am right in saying, is the one that had just been pulled out, brand new pickets had been put in, and it had been, new vines had been planted. So Faverley, I believe, are between the two green areas that you see at that level. I think they have most, if not all of that, and I think they have some above as well. They don't have anything right at the bottom. So that's going to be the first wine we look at. Now, unfortunately, it's not one of the ones that I've got myself, so I'm going to endeavor to catch up on the chat. The converser may not be able to see that all that well. If you have questions to ask, do maybe ask them on the Q&A, and I will try to pick them up there, because I can't see the chat as well as I would like to be able to. Not unless I can magnify it in some magical fashion, but I don't think I can. What I've succeeded in doing is adding a heart to it. Voila. So it's 2015, so big rich year. Now, our friends at, if I say it, we wanted to do, our friends at Faverley do sometimes these days use some whole bunches in their winemaking, but it does depend on which village they're working with, and they never do it in Gevrey-Chambertin. So they like to do it a bit in Chambon-Musigny. They feel it's suitable for that style, but Gevrey, they think, has naturally enough structure of its own that they don't feel the need to add any more. Of course, they built this magnificent new wine cellar, but it wouldn't have been ready for the 2015. Alistair's pointed out that it's wine 2 on your map. You probably have Henri Magnat as wine 1. Would that be correct? Let me know how we go on that. You have Berthaud as wine 1. Aha, right. Let me explain something. There was a problem in the delivery of some of the samples. It sounds as though your maps have not been altered to change that. We were going to have the 2016 from Amélie Berthaud. It wasn't delivered by whoever it was ordered from. And the replacement is the 2012 Domaine Denis Berthaud, donc Amélie's father, which we're going to taste as the third wine. So we're beginning with Faverley. So my apologies if the maps that you've got, the map that you have got, is not correct. So first wine up, therefore, is Domaine Faverley. Good. I was going to place what's in my glass, but it's not the same wine. So D-stems, as I've said, they use quite a lot of new wood for senior wines like this, perhaps up to 2/3. I'm wondering whether to say at this point, if we can, what I feel the characteristics of Cazetiers are, but I think I might keep them back for a while. We did a really interesting, it was a social event rather than sort of a work event, but a group of us met at a certain very fine restaurant in Wandsworth, Chez Bruce, and we had brought along between us a series of Clos Saint-Jacques, so I think we had all the producers, and a series of Cazetiers, and we handed the bottles over to the sommelier and said, serve them in 2 flights, but mix them up, so we don't know if we're tasting Clos Saint-Jacques, if we're tasting Cazetier, and they did that. And in the end, I think on the whole, we did pick which was which, but certainly wouldn't have been 100%. And we did start to form an opinion, but I'm not going to go into that quite yet. Yeah, so good. And Mark has said he started to get back into the Faverley wines. So this is R1 Faverley as the new, in inverted commas, since 2005 boss at Faverley in succession to his father, and Jérôme Flus is the technical director, and they work closely together. So it's not one imposing a style on the other or one doing what he wants without the other's agreement. As we've said before, they took the style away from the over-hard, over-tannic wines which could be very good with age, but were difficult earlier. And they made these beautifully fruit-forward wines. And then since maybe about 2011, 2012, they've just started to build back in enough structure to avoid the wines being so easygoing that you suspected they might not last long enough. So I've reached my glass again. Here we have something which should be already attractive, probably, because it is such a sweet and succulent vintage. Probably hasn't started to close down yet. We're getting some comments from James that you've got some violets, sweet violets, and the excellent depth of fruit. And 2015s are still remarkably drinkable. Now, in Cazetiers, you should have an interesting mix of berry fruits. It's not one of the dark fruited vineyards. Occasionally find that on Champeau, which is a little bit further along on the hillside there. But you should have a mixture of different red berries when it's young as the core to it. But maybe I will mention the other characteristic, which I get more in Cazetiers than in any other vineyards along this bit of hillside. So we're starting with Clos Saint-Jacques, then Cazetiers, then you've got this Petit Cazetiers, which I suspect most people would sell as just Cazetiers. There's one domain Dominique Gallois, who puts Petit Cazetiers on the label. After that, you've got Combo Moine, Goulot, Champeau, and then you run out of Premier Cru land and you become Eversell, still a lovely vineyard. So they're all the east-facing ones. But of all these, the one which to me has got the most mineral tingle, that little zesty freshness that runs as a thread right through the wine, is Cazetiers. And I really like it as a result because of that. Good, so do keep the comments coming. Let me know if you have any thoughts on the wine as it's being tasted, or just in general, and I will catch up. And equally, let me know on the questions. For some reason I can't actually see the Q&A at the moment, but I'm sure I will find it in due course. So we're going to move on to the next wine, and for that, it's very useful to have. It's very useful to have this map here with its green bits on it. What I'm trying to do is to remove my chat over to the side, and I'm not succeeding. Bear with me for a second. No, I can't see how to do that. Unless it's... Could you take the map down for a second, please, Cecilia, and then bring it back? Voilà. Okay, if you want to bring it back now for a minute. That same one, good. It's back again. Now, everything in green is what Charles Amenia, who incidentally we should congratulate, he's a new father, and he just had a hospital appointment for the child, routine, this afternoon, so I couldn't spend time in the vineyards with him, but he kindly sent me this map, and here you can see all those green bits. You've got two little sectors right down in the bottom. You've got two big threads running up through the middle part, and then you've got 2 or 3 blocks up at the top. So really he's got, as I said at the beginning, all the different soil types. His grandfather's house is just at the bottom of the block that's, I'm not going to try and get my hearts out again, but if you see the block that's both at the bottom of the hillside and at the bottom of the map, his house would be approximately at the top of the right-hand section of that, and his new winery, which he's very proud of, is just towards the bottom of that, so you can walk up either from the house or from the winery up into the vineyards. So you can see what a lot he's got. The average age of his vines is 65 years old. He's got some which are around about 100. And also the family, because he is umpteenth generation, the family have cultivated a particular, I won't call it clone because it's pre-clonal, but a particular selection of Pinot, which they call the Pinot Meunier, and which has little small berries, absolute bunches and berries, absolutely the ideal of what you want. Great, that's fine. We can lose that map now, and then I can see the comments better. I'm going to pour myself some of this. So it's 2015. I will hold the bottle up so that you can see it, and you can see that it's a hideous label, and I think it's hideous. Others don't, and including those who don't would be Charles's father, because it was his label. But Charles has switched labels from either 2016 or certainly 2017 vintage. I don't really go for the floral bits on the side there. I'm picking up quite similar comments to what I was reading from the screen of the Faverley wine, because again, it is a sweetish style of fruit, which is what we're seeing now in Burgundy in 2015, 2018, 2019, and I would expect in 2020. A little bit less than 2017, certainly less than 16, 13, 14, but maybe a bit in 2009, 2003. So it's the warmer vintage profile, more typical in some ways than of Pinots from further afield. But the wines still tend then to come back into their classic Burgundian style on the palate and in the flavor profile. It's just that the fruit is a little bit sweeter. Tannins are rarely worthy of mention these days. They used to be quite tough. Even so, the classic balance for me of great Pinot Noir from Burgundy is between fruit and acidity rather than fruit and tannins. Good. So the color, it's beyond its very first youthful flush. It's sort of not purple anymore, but it's still crimson. It's certainly not taking on anything that signifies any maturity. The sweetness and ripeness of fruit that I've already mentioned. But we are still it's predominantly red berry fruit. It's actually quite nicely balanced between the different styles of fruit. I'm not getting a predominance of any one. I'm looking through my normal lexicon of the cherries, the raspberries, and the strawberries. Maybe the cherry is slightly to the fore, red cherry rather than black, but it's not especially distinct in that character. A very good persistence of flavor, structure beautifully interwoven. It's all been destemmed. Charles makes one cuvee which is 100% stems just to show he can, which he puts in various different wines and just makes a large barrel called of his 4 best terroirs called les 4 caractères, which is sort of a pun on character and four terroirs. And I think more recently, 2019, he started to put a few whole bunches into the senior wines anyway, as a question of counterbalancing the richness of these vintages. But otherwise, back in 2015, it would have been entirely destemmed. It's got about 50% new wood. I feel the aspect of new wood, but I can't taste any flavor of it, and certainly no drying aspect. So I feel that's been quite well balanced, quite well achieved. There's still, despite the ripeness, there's still quite an elegance to this wine. I'm enjoying that. I could maybe drink that with my lamb this evening. But ideally, one's going to want to keep that for quite a long time. I expect it will tighten up a little bit. Maybe a vintage like 2015. It's possible it will actually go through life without tightening up too much. Unlike 2005's, where the tannins were very much more present, and they clearly did shut down, 2015's may not. Total lifespan. Well, I'm that jolly well ought to be. Cazetiers jolly well ought to be good for 25 years. But I think this has been made with an attractively light hand, shall we say. So this should be accessible earlier than that. And if you wish, you could start drinking it now, but I'd be sorry to.
Jasper,
Right.
I'm not sure if you can see our Q&A box, but we have a question.
We have a
And
question. Thank you.
yes,
Tell me. Can I see the Q&A? I can see the Q&A. I'll have a look. Yes, good. I've been asked by Nick if he's the second largest owner. I have my crib sheet that tells us everything. He is indeed. He has 1.47 hectares. After that, you have, because what I tend to do with these is largely, unless there's somebody I particularly want to put in, by and large, what I try and do is I take the key players. So we've got 4.17 for Fevely, 1.47 for Henri Magnard, 0.87 of a hectare for Bruno Claire, 0.60 for Armand Rousseau, 0.33 for Philippe Nadef, and then also around about the 30s, a third of a hectare, between a quarter and a third of a hectare, you've got Philippe Leclerc, Séraphin, we're going to have their wine, Michel Magnat from Maurice Saint-Denis, Bouchard, Père et Fils, and then a little bit smaller, 0.22, we have Berthaud Gerbet, Coudray Bizot, wines you don't see very much. Shadow have a tiny holding, and the smallest of all, as quite often, sadly, with their holdings, is the very excellent Domaine du Rocher. But they have less than 2 ouvrays, so they have enough to make a barrel, basically. So the ones we're having tonight, we're having 1, 2, 3, 4, 7, and 10 in the actual order of size of the Cazetiers vineyard. Good. So we've done 1 and 2. We're now going to move to wine 3, which is the one that's changed in name and changed in order. It's a 2012 from Denis Berthaud. So the father of Amélie Berthaud Gerbet. So Amélie's mother was Madame Gerbet from Vosne-Romanée, and her father is Denis Berthaud. And Denis and his brother Vincent took over from their father. The domain's been around for a long, long time. They're based in Fissin, the next door village to Gevrey. And in fact, their Gevrey holdings come from the Domaine de Chazot, a name which will be familiar to many of you. They own a lot of good vineyards, some of which have been with Laurent Ponceau for a long, long time, some of which are with Amélie Berthaud, and there are also 1 or 2 other people who've got some. But Amélie's Gevrey holdings, including this Cazetier, come from there. Or indeed Denis Berthaud's. So I can show you, if we could just have the map again briefly, the map with all the vineyard holdings on. No, not that one either. The other one. Actually, that one will do. That one's fine. Leave that one. Leave that one. It's okay. It doesn't matter which. This one. Let me point out where the Berthaud holdings are, as soon as I can find all the buttons I need to find. One is here. The larger holding is that big box down at the bottom. And there is also a tiny little holding over here. So those are the 2 of, and the vines are planted. I don't know if it's both lots or if it's just the bigger holding. Were planted in 1973. So again, we have some nice mature vines to play with. Okay, thank you. We can lose that, if you would. Back to just me. Have my microphone refixed. Hope that sounds better. So this also is destemmed. In fact, for once this evening, we are in destem city. I don't think we've got anybody who's used stems in any of these wines. They've all used half, all but one have used about 50% new wood. We've moved to 20, and that's the case here. We've moved to 2012 vintage, which is a vintage that we've rather lost from sight because it's not quite good enough, or wasn't thought to be good enough to be one of the constantly talked about years, the 05, 9, 10, 15, 18 years, but nor is it one that is sort of fully ready to drink. And it was a smallish crop. It wasn't great in the Côte de Beaune because actually it would have been really good. But the reason it wasn't great in the end was because of the hail, which just played up and down the Côte de Beaune. Virtually every village and every vineyard got a bit of hail at some point. The Côte de Nuits was broadly spared that, certainly up at the Gevrey end. And it's a vintage which I like a lot, which is for at least the medium term. There's a good structure to it, enough tannin, not too much, still a good acidity. The grapes ripened, but it's not what we've nowadays characterized as one of the hot years. And it was a September harvest, hooray. I like the Gevrey-Chambertin wines. I never in my sort of working importing career actually worked with them. They tended to be quite deep colored. What he would ferment the wines in concrete fermentation vats. He'd give them quite a good cool fermentation first. He would do a fair amount of extraction, punching down, reasonably long cuvaison, and afterwards they would go to barrel. They would sometimes, in fact, do the malolactic still up in tank rather than in barrel. And the wines would be deep colored, reasonably firm, but certainly concentrated. Good viticulture and a slightly sturdy approach perhaps on the vinification. And since then, Amélie, slowly and not all in a hurry and not wishing to change things too dramatically, but she has started to go sort of more organic and a little bit more flexible on the vinification, and probably change the barrel regime a little bit. So this is pre-her period. I think she started getting involved in the family domain from 2013, so the year after this. So I would welcome your comments, if you would, those of you who've got the wine, since it's probably the one that I'm the least familiar with. So Nick's asking, is it incredibly rustic or is there a touch of TCA? It's possible that it is rusticity, which is, so it sounds as though you're all getting the same sort of wine out of this. Bit funky, and yeah, but it's possible that the wine could be like that. I would have hoped that it would have been more firm and sturdy rather than funky, but no one has made a clear call that there is some TCA in it. There would have been quite a few bottles sent out, so if you're all getting a much the same approach. Bracing acidity, we have a comment from Kim, I think. And certainly Gevrey-Chambertin is trying to make wines lasting for the long term. And after Fèvelet and then Charles Magnan, we've had wines which are made in a more modern idiom, which is softer and sweeter up front. I have a feeling though that this isn't probably going to win the contest this evening. But in the old days, if I bought this wine for myself, I would have been buying it with a view for a 20-year wine, and wouldn't be worried about it being a little bit awkward and ugly at the moment. So I can't. When I get my samples, I will sit down and taste them all, and I will put up some tasting notes about it. So it's going to have a comparison in. Someone has already made that mention. Somebody's made the comparison with the other 2012, which is going to be in quite a different style. So it sounds as though that's not going to be the favorite of the evening. Apologies for that. But it gives 5 other wines a chance to shine. And the next we're going to look at, and again, not a wine which I have in front of me tonight, is the 2012 from Domaine Armand Rousseau. And of course, in the case of Rousseau, so familiar to very many of you. And do keep the questions coming as well, by the way. It's such a different style. And there has been a little tendency, I read on a few blogs around the place, to begin to criticize Rousseau in recent years. And I don't understand why. It's exactly the same wine as it was before, made, if anything, with more care. The general discussion has been that in the earlier period under Charles Rousseau, it was the 3 grand wines which were great and the others were a little bit indifferent. It's still true, I think, that there is quite a step up once you start getting, it's more than just 3, but once you get perhaps to Clos de la Roche, certainly to Gevrey-Chambertin, and then the Clos Saint-Jacques, the Clos de Bèze, and the Chambertin itself. Clearly, you are in really outstanding territory. and people are a little bit less interested in. I like the village wine myself. Happy with the Lavaux. I like the Cazetiers. The Gevrey-Chambertin sometimes leaves me a little bit cold, and then there's the Mézy, which I like. But I do feel there's more of a step up once you get to Clos de la Roche. So we've got the Cazetiers. I don't know, I'm afraid, exactly which their holding is. I have a feeling it's blocks in the middle. Fairly sure of that, in fact. I don't think they're right at the top, and they're certainly not right at the bottom. And they have 0.60, so they are number 4 in the volume terms. So they aren't organic, but they run their viticulture properly. They haven't done anything trendy in raising to great heights how they make their vines. It's standard, but really well done. And Eric Rousseau is one of those who you will find out in the vines rather than in the cellar. His daughter Cyrielle is the one who conducts tastings these days. Eric's never really much enjoyed doing that. But he does just adore to be out in the vineyards with his team, making it all happen from that point of view. It's a very gentle approach to vinification. Doesn't mean to say they don't do things like punching down and so on. They've never had to change anything. They just sort of got it right. They've got the green fingers when it comes to how they vinify the wines. They're a little bit different in the cellar insofar as that their grandest appellations get 100% new oak. Now, other appellations, so we'd include Cazetiers in that, they received the previous year's new barrels, so it's 100% in one-year-old barrel. And then the other more or less peculiarity here at Rousseau, but it's the same as the Domaine de la Romanée-Conti, is that they don't then put all the wines from all the barrels up into a big tank and let it blend together in a tank. They group them together in little lots of 4 barrels here, which are then bottled as one little lot of 4 barrels, and then another lot of 4 or 6 barrels is done, and so on and so forth. So in theory, it could make a slight difference between which grouping of barrels you've got, but it shouldn't really do so. So that's the style of doing things. I've been asked by Bjorn if Cazetiers is my second favorite Premier Cru in Gevrey. It may well be. Combotte would be a candidate. I'm starting to enjoy Lavaux Saint-Jacques more than I did before. Some other vineyards, I've got individual wines which are very much high in the hit parade for me. But I'm going to say yes, unless it's Combotte, then I think I'm going to say that Cazetiers is my second favorite, certainly on the podium in Gevrey-Chambertin. Not many people, unfortunately, have both Cazetiers and Clos Saint-Jacques, but we are going to finish tonight with Bruno Claire, who is the person who does. Good. If we have no more questions or comments, we're getting some zingy red fruits from Alistair. Big Rousseau fan. Well, I hope most people are. Edward's been a little calmer on that. It's gone for up to a point. Rousseau someone suggested it's a little bit oak heavy. I never get an over-dominance of oak with Rousseau, but it's always present. And frankly, I find tasting youngish wines that 1-year oak, from the taste profile at any rate, is often just as prominent as brand new oak. But I can't remember opening and drinking a Rousseau bottle where I thought, oh dear, there's too much oak in that. So I'd be pretty comfortable where we are. I would think a 2012 Cazetiers from Rousseau would be starting to approach drinking and will be comfortable for another decade, but I would see no problem in drinking that. After all, it will have sold out in local Burgundy restaurants 5 or 6 years ago, so I rant on from time to time about that. I do just wish some of the local restaurants had a few older wines. 1 or 2 do, but very few. That's a good question from Kim. Which vintages do I think would most suit the Cazetiers profile? Well, I don't think it really wants a hot, rich year. It doesn't need that. It's going to ripen well anyway with its east-facing and good angles. You can argue that Lavaux Saint-Jacques and further up in the Comte de Lavaux will do well in a hot year. So a bit of sunshine for sure. but I can see 2012 being a good year. I can see 2017, 16 as well, 16, 17 being good years. I don't think Cazetiers is going to be spoiled by a hot vintage, but it doesn't need one. It's not one of those where you're going to get it drying out and getting hydric stress. There is enough topsoil in most parts at any rate. Certainly in my 2018, 2019 tastings, it's not one of those where I put a question mark against it. Good. So if you're ready, we will move on. What have I got on my sheet? It's our next wine. Aha, I even have the wine. So grab my other glass. My special thanks to, because without any warning, I just popped up and knocked on the door at Domaine Séraphin, saw Christian Séraphin's daughter, Karine, who with her cousin Frédéric, they run the domain together. It's Frédéric on the technical, practical side. She's the one in the vines and in particular making the wine, and Karine is more on sales and admin. But she very sweetly said, oh, if your samples haven't come, I will give you a bottle of the 2010 Cazetiers. It's also a domain which makes a point of keeping some vintages back, so that each year they make a small release of older wines, which they think are ready to drink, as well as releasing a proportion of the new vintage. I'm expecting quite a different approach here, and the colour is remarkably young. It's at least as young, it's deeper, and probably more youthful than the 2015 from Monia. Why would that be? One of the factors is that everything beyond their baby Gevrey-Chambertin, Bourgogne Rouge, everything they make gets 100% new oak. They play around with the tonneliers a little bit, coopers a little bit, depending on the nature of the vineyard. The wines are all destemmed, the grapes are destemmed, and the wines are given a moderately forceful extractive vinification and a lot of new oak. And again, this is the Séraphin recipe for wines which will age for an incredibly long time. On one visit there, I can't think why he brought it out, but Christian, or maybe Frédéric, brought out a bottle of 1968, arguably the worst vintage since the war, 63, 65, 68, a trio of complete disasters. And he brought a bottle of the Chambertin 68 out just to try, and it was rosé coloured, but it was still actually a nice wine at more than 40 years old, 45 years old, I think, at the time that we tasted it. So the great vintages will last a really long time. And here we've got 2010, which I think we're all agreed is one of the vintages that we love. I'm getting beautiful use to this. Yes. I mean, that could almost be somebody else's 2018, couldn't it? My bottle is a little bit cold because it sat in the car while we filmed and it came back here, and I haven't artificially warmed it up because I think that's a disaster with Pinot Noir. I think you just have to live with it if your bottle's a bit cold to begin with. I'm purring gently now, but there's that brilliant sweet raspberry plus little edges of cherry fruit, but it is in no way vulgar, in no way jammy. It finishes with a superb freshness. There are tannins here, which can be the vinification. It can also be definitely from the 100% new wood. And you know, when you come, those of you who go in the years, you can do it to the en primeur tastings in London or elsewhere, and you taste the young Séraphins, they're pretty brutal. Even at the time that we do our Bergfest tastings, when they're tasting the wines after they've been in bottle for just a year and a half, they're still quite brutal. And the oak shows strongly. And yet, I've never really had a mature Séraphin wine where I felt, gosh, that oak is too much. It's still present in those little tannins at the back, but you've still got a freshness. Now, I can't talk about all the wines tonight, but I can talk about the two I've tasted. There is a little bit of a mineral feel at the back there to keep us going. Alistair mentions bright acidity as being perhaps a slight cliche, but brightness and acidity do go together, because when you have a higher acid wine, and this would all be natural acidity, I assure you, when you have a higher acid wine, that is lower pH, and pH isn't just a measure of acidity, but it also affects the color scheme. So you tend to get brighter, cleaner, fresher, more purple colors in youth, but altogether brighter colors when it is low pH, i.e. high acid wine. And when you get a high pH, low acid wine, you tend to get much less purple, slightly more somber, more matte colors. And even in a young wine, crimson is more likely to be your ruby crimson is more likely to be your descriptor rather than a fresh purple. So I can see why bright acidity does come into it as a regular descriptor. Nick's finding a savory character, and I don't disagree with that at all. Personally, I'm happy with that because, I mean, maybe it's the generation that I am from and what wines were like in much less ripe days, but I don't need too much sweetness accessibility. Savory is often a word that I use in Gevrey-Chambertin in any case. Village Gevrey-Chambertin quite often have red fruit plus savory character. We can see that here. And again, it's a little bit the winemaking style. So there are 4 small blocks. If we go back to one or other, either, Cecilia, either the map with the green bits, maybe that's actually the clearest map to look at. I will just point out to you. Thank you for that. Now we'll just annotate it with my usual annotations. I would, if I could. Unfortunately, I need to kill off. There, we can do that. So the house is just below again. There are 4 blocks. Here's the old block. That was the original block. When the Séraphin grandparents came to Burgundy, they bought the house just at the foot here, that building there. And these vines went with it, except they weren't vines. It was just bare land, and they planted them up in the very early 1960s, 63, 65 is when they planted these vines. They're still there, so they're now nearly 60 years old. More recently, they bought this little block here, which then needed replanting, and they're just 4-year-old vines. So for a while yet, they will go into the village of Gevrey-Chambertin and not into the Cazetiers. There's also another block here, which has 4-year-old vines, and the same thing. And then the oldest vines is this block here. So as you can see, it's all a run, it's all the lower part. But these vines they don't have an exact date of plantation, but they're in the 1930s. So they're 90-year-old vines, give or take. And that, with the 60-year-old vines, those two are the backbone of this particular cuvée. So if we can lose the map now, that would be great. Thank you. The interesting thing to me is that I didn't really know the Séraphin wines until I sold my business to Berry Brothers in 2003 and started tasting their range of Burgundies, as well as they had a few producers, not as many as we were able to bring them, which is why they bought my business. But Séraphin and Cazetiers were 2 which I tasted and thought, wow, these are really good. And they were the 2 I especially marked out. That was in the days of Christian Séraphin when he was at the helm. Though when he became old and a little bit not too well, his daughter Frederique has been careful not really to change the style of how not his daughter, his niece Frederique has been careful not to try to change the style of the winemaking too much. But gorgeous, gorgeous wine there. Great, okay. We have one more wine to come. You have one more wine to come, those of you who have the wines. I sadly don't. But please tuck in to Bruno Claire's Gevrey-Chambertin Cazetiers. Well, a sad moment when I went by and tasted in late November, beginning December, because I tasted with Bruno, which is always a pleasure, and I tasted with his right-hand man, Philippe Brun. And Philippe had told me the previous year that he wasn't too far away from retirement. So I said, Philippe, good to see you. You're not retiring just yet, are you? He said, yes, next week. He's such a lovely man, and they make a brilliant couple, those 2, bouncing off each other, talking about the wines. But it's going to be the same thing with I believe, 3 of Bruno's children. His daughter Margot, who I think is coming to work there, and certainly 2 sons, Edouard and Arthur. It was Edouard first, but I believe that he's going to move from the cellar into the vineyards, and Arthur is going to be making the wine. I hope I've got that the right way round. Bruno is definitely going to have his say. He's always has plenty of interesting opinions about things. It is one of the most fascinating cellars to taste in because of their big holdings of Chambertin Clos de Bèze, Gevrey-Chambertin Clos Saint-Jacques, and Cazetiers. A lot of people imagine the domain must be in Gevrey, but in fact it's not. It's 3 villages further north in Marcenais. So we always taste the Cazetiers and then the Clos Saint-Jacques. And there's always a discussion of which do you prefer this year. And I quite often put a hand up and say, well, I rather like the Cazetiers. And it's true, it's the more forward of the 2 every year. But you hardly ever get either Bruno or Philippe prepared to say that it isn't the Clos Saint-Jacques, which came from Bruno's mother, whose house was at the foot of Clos Saint-Jacques. That tends to be their favourite. And probably in the long run, that would be the right choice. The other factor is that the Clos Saint-Jacques, the vineyard, runs all the way up from the bottom to the top, and the holding of Cazetiers is at the top of the vineyard, so Couleur on the white marl. For a long time, the vines were actually planted at the same period. So both of them were planted in the same time in 1957-58, using the same vineyard material, of course, planted by the same people in the same way. So the only difference was between the 2 vineyards and the fact that Cazetiers is just 1 block. And that I found made tasting really exciting. Recently, they've replanted a little bit of the Cazetiers, though it probably isn't ready to go into the main wine yet. So that will change a little bit. So what I was told by Bruno or by Philippe, I forget which now, is that the Cazetiers would always have the, get this the right way around, always have the higher pH of the 2, so it would have the lower acidity, and it would therefore mature a little bit more quickly than the Clos Saint-Jacques. And certainly the Clos Saint-Jacques is the, I was going to say bruiser, that would be unfair, but is the sturdier wine for the longer term. But I've always had a weakness for the Cazetiers, I have to say. So it's 2005, a vintage which, as many of you will know, I cited at the time or in the years immediately afterwards as the best Burgundy vintage of my working lifetime. Has it been challenged by vintages since? Perhaps. I'm not necessarily ready to say that any other vintage is definitely finer. The thing about 05, though, was that it wasn't ridiculously hot. It was a nice, sunny, evenly hot vintage, but it was pretty dry. And the tannins are relatively firm in 2005, as a result of which the wines did shut down somewhat, and in my opinion, probably aren't yet ready to be drunk again, except at the lower end. So Bourgognes and generic 2005s, yes, good Premier Crus and Grand Crus, I would prefer to keep them. So let's have a little look and see what your thoughts are on the screen. So on we go. Yeah, so Edward says it's still some way from maturity, and the rest of you are arguing about how to pronounce various English words, so we won't get worried about that. Incidentally, I will just say I've been saying Cazetiers as if it's almost just 2 syllables rather than 3, rather than Cazetiers. You certainly don't want to stress the E. There's no acute accent. And where this word comes from, it used to be called Cazetiers more in the 19th century, and that would come from the Latin castellum, Italian castello, and it is right next door to the Château de Gevrey-Chambertin, which I'm thrilled to see is being really, really thoroughly renovated. We met, in fact, the Chinese lady who is sort of, if you like, at least part of the time, the caretaker there, and it's all, we couldn't go in and visit because really they are in full building works. But congratulations to the gentleman from Macau, Louis Ng, who bought it in 2012. He handed the vineyards over to Domaine Rousseau, so they're being brilliantly looked after. They probably weren't being terribly well looked after before. And B, he's having the chateau properly renovated. So full marks to him on those scores. So let's have a little look and see what the comments are. A few tertiary aromas, that's fair enough, that's there. I think what probably is true also is that the tannins won't have fully softened yet. We've got a few bits of pepperiness about the wines. And it will, yes, various people are agreeing that it is the most tannic. It's just a bit of grouse to go with it. I like that. Yeah, you'll have to open a fresh bottle when you wait for the next grouse season. So I think these last two wines are the oldest and the ones that need the longest time. The last three wines, well, no, sorry. I'm going to say that the Berthaud 2012 also needs a long, long time, and these two need a long time. Even the most accessible of them might be the Séraphin, but even then, I think that's so young. I would much rather keep that bottle. I might not finish it off tonight. I might leave it on ullage 2 or 3 days before finishing it off. So I'm going to have another little slug of it now. We're about 5 minutes from time. So do you have any questions that you would like to ask? We have one from David. Do I think that there are too many Grand Crus in Gevrey and that the many Grand Crus are not that much better than the top Premier Crus? A wonderful discussion point. Chambertin Grand Cru, no question. Clos de Bez Grand Cru, no question. After that, in totally different styles, I love Mazy Chambertin as more sturdy and Bruchot Chambertin as more elegant. No question about those two. I'm quite a fan of Latricia Chambertin as well. That's also in the upper part. So we'll give that Grand Cru. That's 5. Then we got the ones along the bottom, Chambertin, Masouet Chambertin, Griot Chambertin, and Chapelle Chambertin. And at different times, I've probably criticized all of those and said they're not quite worth it. And the more time goes on, the more I'm prepared to support their candidature. Chapelle, I thought, was a little bit weak, but then having tasted some brilliant examples from Jadot, from Cécile Tremblay, from Pierre Damois, from Trappé-Rossignol-Trappé. Sorry if I've left one out. It might be fun to do a Chapelle in the evening one day. I'm pretty happy with that. Griot might depend a little bit on exactly where you are. It's sort of an amphitheatre. Probably isn't quite even. But if you've tasted the Griot from, let's think, Fourier or Durocher, then they're spectacular wines. Durand have a very good one too. I'm bound to have left others out. Most people discuss Masouet Chambertin because it goes right down to the main road, and Charmes Chambertin. But even so, I love those wines. And Masouet, the people who make both, I often prefer the Masouet to the Charmes. But when you have Charmes Chambertin from Séraphin, from Denis Bachelet, from Joseph Roti, and a few others, that's definitely Grand Cru. Of the Premier Crus, Clos Saint-Jacques, clearly it's right up there. It's brilliant wine. I think nobody would really hesitate about making that a Grand Cru along with Chambol Amoureuse. Combat and Cazetiers, I think I would rather have them as the grandest of the Premier Crus rather than as Grand Crus. Chirp up if you'd like to on the chat and say if you feel. Do you feel that there is Grand Cru quality in tonight's wines, or do you feel we're more in the territory of very best Premier Cru? So chirp away, and what's that? Kate asks, why Combat over Cazetiers? I'm fairly even in them. Combat is one of those vineyards which is completely surrounded on the sort of north to south axis by Grand Crus. It's got all the Grand Crus of Maurice Saint-Denis south of it, all the Grand Crus which are very north of it. It's just a little bit down in a dip, but there is a succulence about the wines. I can think of a friend for his 50th birthday invited loads of us to the incredible Ben Greuze restaurant in Tournus, and we must have drunk a case. It feels as though it was a case per person, but it's probably a case between us, of the Gevrey-Chambertin 1993 from Dujac, and it was just utterly lovely wine. So the Combat I have a real weakness for, but I'd probably put Cazetiers and Combat pretty much together. Very best Premier Cru, Premier Cru for me. If Rougier wasn't the Grand Cru from last week, then neither is Cazetiers. Yeah, everybody is agreed, I think, that we're up in the top level of Premier Cru. I'm pretty happy with that. Okay, we've just got time for the quiz. Then if we can have, I say quiz every evening, it's a poll. If Cecilia, you would kindly put up our poll. I think you've got 2 votes. You should have. I'm going. I shall give 2 votes, but I can't really join in. But I'm going to give 2 votes anyway. And I have submitted mine. If you would like to submit yours, I'll count down from 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's have a look at the answers, please. And we have Berto. Oh, it's got a vote. If it's got 3%, that means that we have got a nice large number of people voting. So we got a vote there, which is great. Thank you for that. We've got healthy votes for Faiveley. And then we've got a fairly even distribution between 3 people competing for second and third, which is narrowly. Bruno just misses out in 4th place with 33%. Serafin's in 3rd place with 36%, and that was one I voted for. Henri Magnat, Charles Magnat, he'll be thrilled with that. And with his new baby, has got 39%. And Rousseau has got 52%. So we don't learn anything new with that, but nor should we deride people for being established classics. It's a great mix. What I'm taking from that, we have at least 4, if not 5 wines that people have thoroughly enjoyed. Well, I will just keep monitoring any last questions and comments. But apart from that, as we come to the end for tonight, I will be back with you on Tuesday next week, and it won't be in my setting here in the village of Bouillon. We will be at Domaine Ponceau with Alexandre, the technical director, stroke winemaker, stroke régisseur, whatever you want to call him. He will be spending the day with Bertrand doing some filming in the vineyards earlier in the day, and then we will be tasting a vertical of 6 vintages, and it's an interesting mix. It's not just sort of a selling occasion to hit up all the highest spots. It's a mix of complicated vintages and really good vintages, and that will be our next thing. After that, I'm setting up a tasting with Beaune Vineyards, and I've got some more ideas to tell you about next week. So from me and from Bertrand behind the cameras, and from Cecilia behind the communications, and from Ronan sitting at home with a large magnum of Cazetiers, I hope. It's good night and thank you very much. Bye-bye.